brilliant ideas, powered by Hyundai Motor.
The contemporary art world is vibrant and booming as never before. It's a 21st century phenomenon, a global industry in its own right. Brilliant Ideas looks at the artists at the heart of this. They have a unique power to inspire, astonish, provoke and shock. To push boundaries, ask new questions and see the world afresh. Artists like Michael Jew. Michael Jew is an artist who delights and disturbs in equal measure.
With the best of art, some of the boundaries between I and we and you dissolve.
His works range from sculpture, performance and video art, to arresting large-scale installations.
He's a conceptual artist. You wouldn't be able to classify him as one thing over another.
And in his personal exploration of a wide range of themes, from identity, nature and politics, Michael Jew has become one of America's most enigmatic artists.
His work was able to transform his identity into something more universal, and that's what a good contemporary artist can do, is that.
Michael Jew's work, it's about material, it's about new ways of looking, it's about deconstructing things. It allows you to spend time with it and, discover different things within it over time.
Michael Jew was never destined to be an artist. Born to scientists, he was, in art terms, a late bloomer, only joining art school in his early 20s.
I was born in upstate New York and grew up there outside of Ithaca in the 60s. My parents came over from Korea in the late 50s, early 60s, and ended up doing postgraduate work there. So I grew up in a very active academic environment. I never had known of art as a career. I was never told that you could be an artist. And it wasn't until I took work in Vienna, Austria, doing very low-level science work, research work, that I spent some time with scientists who would rather talk about art and culture. And I felt a lot of urgency at that time, and I immediately started cold calling art schools and eventually got in. I had come to New York to be in Manhattan, and its energy is very particular and very special. So what I like about Red Hook is that it's cut off, so close to Manhattan, but you can blow things up here. And you couldn't do that in Manhattan. We're in Red Hook, Brooklyn, and this is my studio, and welcome. My work is about possibility and potential. In a way, if the studio is a place full of possibility, almost a laboratory for experimentation.
Michael's work, it's an individual exploration. He just has a lot of tools in the paint box, and he's putting them together in interesting and creative ways.
A lot of times in the studio I'll have a group of objects laid out, what are kind of almost study tables for form. And these forms will keep changing as I go back to them. They're almost like mini studios in and of themselves. This table happens to be an examination of crystal forms. In many ways, it could be seen as a model for my process. Sometimes these forms grow into something fruitful, and sometimes they don't grow at all, and they're very static. So by living with some of these forms and having them go through some of the other projects, I think they all influence each other in some ways. Even though my folks were both scientists, our household was fairly diverse. There was quite a bit of contradiction in terms of science, religion, philosophy. And my father was an excellent draftsman, and he would take us on trips to the forest, and I remember him drawing from nature. Growing up in such a rural environment as upstate New York and then almost pre-suburban Minnesota, I was exposed to a lot of nature and time alone, and I think my natural curiosity in those situations was piqued. This is from a series of works called Improved Racks. In nature, when one of these animals drops a horn, it could go for miles before it drops the other horn. So to me, the act of bringing them together again to one whole seemed kind of poignant. That in nature, nothing's truly perfectly balanced or perfectly symmetrical, and so by cutting these antlers into parts and rebalancing them by the millimeter, I feel I'm kind of imposing my will or the artist's will on nature here, and trying to rebalance and improve upon something that's already, almost perfect in a way, or something we think of as perfect.
The work of Michael, there's enough mystery in it, there's enough narrative to it. It's sort of a very balanced work of being poetic and super intelligent at the same time. I think people respond in a weird way viscerally to it, because it is trying to articulate sort of a being rather than a complete narrative.
For me, the process of realizing an artwork is a bit of a path that goes in multiple directions. I'll often subject a work to some kind of extreme process, whether it's chemical or whether it's physical, whether it's something born out of a laboratory or born out of a social experiment. I guess allow it to be shaped by being subjected to those things. And I think in many ways my art is about that type of potential and possibility, and perhaps the result is really not the anticipated outcome.
When Michael Jew burst onto the art scene in the early 90s, the American markets had very little exposure to the Asian art world. Though born and bred in upstate New York, he was viewed as not quite American, not quite Korean, and not quite a combination of the two.
Michael Jew is an artist that I met for the first time in the Venice Biennale in 1993, and he presented this huge section of a plane from Korean War with his self-portrait as a woman on top of the side of the plane. And that moment, Michael Jew was a complete novelty, because he was the first artist that was able to combine these two different cultures, the Western American and the Korean.
Michael has also found success in South Korea. In 2001, he represented the country at the Venice Biennale, once more deconstructing and reconstructing nature in his familiar style. But while he easily traverses between these two realms, he also declines cultural categorization.
Being labeled as a Korean artist troubles me in as much as the fact that any labeling is a bit troubling. I kind of resist the label of Korean American, and in many ways Korean strikes me as kind of funny, because it's rather inaccurate. And it really depends on what you're speaking from. And in some ways, I see myself as as absolutely international and primarily American.
I think Michael Jew is different because I don't think that he's so wedded to saying I'm a Korean or I'm a Korean American. I mean, he was born in the States, he was educated here, so he was, in a way, not transplanted. He was almost homegrown, if you will. And I think that has a more positive impact on the work that he has made, because it's less about saying I'm Korean or Korean American. I'm an artist exploring different forms of identity and different forms of the practice of making art.
What might be perceived as an interest in personal identity is really, for me, an interest in how we get to where we've arrived, you know. It's more about an interest in human consciousness, and I think that is in my line of interest or thinking, or kind of elliptical thinking, the way I see any kind of relationship of identity to my work. One of the things that process-wise that I'm very interested in lately is the creation of and perception of image. In a way, here, the riot shields are a wall or a barrier, but ultimately what we're looking at is a reflection of ourselves. And the implication is it forms a portable architecture that forms a portable borderline that almost moves and undulates, you know, at the will of the individuals behind it. But I think when we look at them or it or they, you know, I'm interested in how we're looking at a distorted version of ourselves at the same time, and makes you more aware of everything else around you.
One of the things that is happening in Michael's work is that he is now talking about the audience and talking about the viewer, how we see ourselves, and most of all, how we relate to one another. In works before of his that you could look at and watch the investigation of what he was talking about, the investigation of identity and power and things like that. Now he invites you in with the use of mirrors to not only see what he has to say about it, but how you, looking at what he's saying, respond to it. So you become part of the piece. And I think that this is a big issue for a lot of contemporary artists, the use of mirrors, because we're returning to this idea of spirit and alchemy and trying to figure out who and why we're here and how to cope with it.
In March last year, Michael embarked on his most ambitious mirrored project, a site-specific installation in the Middle East for the 2015 Sharjah Biennial.
I wanted to make a space that reflected both the viewer and the place in which it was situated. So over the course of the year, spending, I think, about 6 site visits, I found myself moving across the desert, following the irrigation channels and archaeological sites. I felt a great intimacy with the earth, and so it struck me that the experience of, you know, the present could be so, could connect you to the past so deeply. In this work in Sharjah, these pathways all lead to a large reflected image of the city behind you. And as you walk towards yourself along these carved channels in the earth that are blueprinted from existing and archaeological irrigation channels, that you not only walk towards yourself, but you walk away from the place that you've been. I like the idea that you're in the present, thinking about the past and walking towards yourself, but also away from what you've left behind.
Ideas. Ideas.
In 1993, at 26 years old, Michael Dew exhibited Salt Transfer Cycle, a video installation that still today remains one of his seminal works.
The artwork I'm probably best known for is a performance work called Salt Transfer Cycle. It's a work that's part of an ongoing series of performative actions or gestures. Salt Transfer Cycle was the first.
Michael placed himself as the subject of the film, travelling across the world in an attempt to articulate our relationship with nature, with salt as the common link. Central to this film was the idea of energy, a recurring theme that has come to define his 20-year career.
Salt Transfer Cycle basically dealt with a character, myself, traveling from east to west. In it, I wanted to set up an idea of energy, a dream almost, but a dream of energy in the form of salt, played out at first with artifice by swimming through 2,000 pounds of MSG to going to an environment of extreme real salt, the salt desert in Utah, to finally ending up in the mountains of South Korea waiting for wild elk to lick salt off my body and kind of return that idea, I guess, of this white powder and have it enter the bloodstreams of these animals and get shot back out into nature and therefore continue some kind of cycle.
The narrative is abstract in his work, but there is always a narrative. There's always something that stands for it. It's almost like a key to a puzzle or a map. There is just something in that particular piece that you don't respond to with your mind. You respond to because you just respond to it. People identify with it no matter where they're from.
Some of the themes of the work that I'm most interested in are energy and transformation. Energy is such a big word in many ways, but I think it goes hand in hand with the idea of transformation. I like the idea that energy itself exists and is a malleable, almost kind of substance, and it's almost, for me, parallel to the idea of sculpture.
A characteristic of Michael Ju's work is the fact that he works in all mediums, that he's a conceptual artist, and whatever's appropriate to articulate that idea, whether it be a sculpture, or found objects, or something he paints, it's always in service to this idea that he has.
This is an example from a relatively very new series of work, actually. A new group of work involving calories of human energy. In this case, we've been calculating the number of calories of various actions. This happens to be 0.0315 calories per millisecond. And this is the number of calories that it takes to fall.
Michael Ju works is very both mysterious and interesting and captivating. Since 1993, the work of Michael Ju developed immensely. I mean, it became much more elaborate and sophisticated. It's more philosophical, and the impact is always direct, but you cannot pin it down.
The most important for me, and currently, exploring the idea of calories of human nature. In order to determine calories, you burn something up and measure the energy lost. In order to expend energy, you decimate or work your body. And I think that those parallels are interesting. Silkscreen print is lurking underneath. You get a hint of one here. And as the next layers are applied, it brings back the text, which has been buried now under a layer of kind of excess silver. It's upside down. It's interesting, huh? This is the calories to get up or to rise per millisecond. When I first came to art, I was really interested in its possibility for things in the present tense, things that could essentially be launched as an experiment and yield a result that had an immediate, visceral kind of quality. I mean, early pieces I was doing probably in art school were driving people crazy. They were electrifying fresh chunks of muscle tissue so that they would move and make drawings, or interacting in nature, getting animals to do their own actions.
Michael has made his career from presenting his ideas in extreme and unexpected ways. But sometimes his unusual approach has also left people feeling alienated.
There have been works that are controversial, either because it was the work or it was a hostile audience. My exhibition I did in 2009 wasn't very well received. There was a confused reception because I showed a lot of different mediums alongside each other, when really it was simply about the process of making. But it definitely garnered some of the harshest reviews.
The messages are not always easy to decipher in his work. He's very interested in materials and presenting them in new ways, and some of the information that he's trying to communicate is more subtle. It takes more effort to get into it. It requires you to participate. And I think that's a really important aspect of any artist. If you're just there sitting back and understand, oh, I get it, that's what it looks like, I don't necessarily see that that is successful work. But if you're engaged and you're forced to give some thought to it, that, in my personal opinion, makes it a much more successful work of art.
All of the work is always, for me, in the process of becoming or being, whether it's more direct or obvious as synthetic human sweat evaporating to leave salt crystals and amino acid and skin tissue residue, to calculating the number of calories it takes to pull the trigger of a loaded Smith & Wesson police handgun, to waiting for wild elk to lick salt off my body for 10 days, to the idea of making a cast of something in the natural world and then going through a number of processes to arrest that cast of the mold. Some of the results become a little closer to a fixed and discrete art object, but I think I see no difference with a work like that to walking 400 miles against the flow of the Alaskan pipeline just to measure the human energy it takes per step, as opposed to, you know, the millions of years of fossil fuel that are flowing the other direction. So experience and experiential parts of the work, whether they are experienced by me as the protagonist or whether they're subjected to it by me as the protagonist in the artworks, it doesn't really change. I think my intention for the work isn't about a specific type of communication. I think the embedding of meaning and intention that I have within the work is in many ways the motivation to make and the reason the work takes the particular shape it does. I hope that the viewer's experience or my work in the space is generous enough, physically and visually, to engage the viewer long enough for it to have any kind of impact or take some sort of hold. I think art is one of the last arenas and last areas that defy a certain kind of specialization. The process of making art is an examination or a view into ourselves or where we are at a particular moment. I mean, I think that in many ways, with the best of art, some of the boundaries between I and we and you dissolve into a place where intentionality, process, author, and viewer disappear. And I think that in that place, there's important questions that can be asked that don't get asked in certain other disciplines or practices.
Brilliant ideas, powered by Hyundai Motor.